Sorry for a fairly negative title and thumbnail here, but I feel like this is really bad news for Warhammer 40k fans, mainly for people who have bought into the new and very shiny Horus Heresy miniatures and the datasheets that you can fill them for 40k. In a change that I think is going to ruffle a lot of feathers, Games Workshop has just en masse sent any of their Horus Heresy Forge World stuff all the way to Legends. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about one of the changes that I like least about this entire 10th edition so far. The news that Games Workshop is basically dividing their Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40k range, sending a whole bunch of fan favourite models to Legends for Warhammer 40k, just to get some basic rules and points costs, and then never again to be touched by balance passes, or to be recommended for tournaments and things. It is a change that might affect some of you a lot more than others, but I feel like for a bunch of people who own these models and like to either build lists that can tie in with Games Workshop's balance passes so they're not bringing OP units to beat their opponent with, or they like to build lists that could be potentially taken to a tournament someday, I feel like this is going to be a real kick in the teeth. In my opinion, this really is quite a major change for Warhammer 40k 10th, and basically going back really quite a long time. Forge World's fancy relic war machines from the Horus Heresy could be fielded in Warhammer 40k, maybe notably things like Sicaran battle tanks, the Contemptor Dreadnought, the Leviathan Dreadnought, and plenty more besides, and that certainly hasn't changed throughout 8th and 9th edition. You can fill them in fully legal match play data sheets with points and balance updates in the Imperial Armour Compendium. In fact, a whole load of people out there might have been adding things like Leviathan Dreadnoughts and Contemptor Dreadnoughts to their Warhammer 40k collection, as Games Workshop has only just released a whole bunch of fancy plastic kits for them for their new and revamped Horus Heresy. The models are really nice, and are pretty good fun to play in game. Kind of cool to see some relics from the distant past striding across the battlefield from time to time, even if they're not super common in tournament play. Many of these are really popular models: the Leviathan Dreadnought, the Contemptor Dreadnought, Vindicator Laser Destroyers, and really quite a lot of the Chaos Space Marines' big fancy shiny tools, things like the Chaos Decimator and the Brass Scorpion. It seems that Games Workshop is going a mass consignee of these to Legends, and bar some things that are actually designed for the Warhammer 40k setting, like say the Astraeus tank, just about the only things saved that are regularly played in Horus Heresy are apparently the variant Imperial Knight chassis and the Adeptus Custodes line. In the article, they are trying to dress that up as nicely as they can, basically saying that they will still have datasheets and points values on launch, and the only major change is they won't be recommended for competitive play, and they also won't be considered whatsoever when they do their balance updates, or presumably when they write the codexes that come out for 10th edition. It means they will still be playable at edition launch, and you will be able to play them casually with your friends. And if you do have a gaming group that's absolutely happy to keep on doing that, then all well and good, the change might not affect you quite so much. Realistically though, when things go to Legends, a lot of people just tend to avoid them. There's maybe a bit of a sense that Legends units aren't really considered for the balance passes, so are going to be kind of unbalanced if you add them in with the other options in the codex. If for example you win a game and you've made heavy use of the Legends units to carry your army to victory, there might just be a bit of a sense that you've just been carried by units that weren't really designed to be balanced against the enemy's army. Also, as I mentioned, while not everyone goes to tournaments, a lot of people like to design a list where theoretically they could. And for people who enjoy theory crafting and like to really try and solve the balanced tactical puzzle of Warhammer 40k, it just makes these units a lot less satisfying to use, as again, even if you do design something very strong, if you turned up to a tournament with them, then most of them would be banned, and again the sense that you might be using unbalanced rules, so a lot of people will just leave them out of their lists because of that. I think in general the thing that irritates me the most about this is that they've been selling the new shiny kits to 40k players really quite recently, and they certainly haven't put any sort of disclaimer on people picking up Leviathan Dreadnoughts or Contemptor Dreadnoughts that they'd be relegated to Legends basically within the year. Going through the list, here's the list of stuff that's been sent to Legends, plus some AdMech and Chaos stuff that we'll get onto. They're calling this list the Legends of the Horus Heresy, and they say they're for use in match and narrative play but not competitive events. That is definitely true, that will help a lot of people, but still that's the same with any Legends units right now, it doesn't really change what they're doing that much. Going through the list, we've got the Leviathan, Contemptor and Derrideo Dreadnoughts. I'd say they're perhaps some of the very biggest losses and perhaps some of the most common units that people often ran in 40k. Then we've got the Heresy Big Armour, that recent Kratos tank, the new redesigned Sicaran, which has been in the game for a long time, the Spartan variants like the Cerberus and the Typhon, and they also say certain variants of the Land Raider, Vindicator and Whirlwind. I'd guess that'd be the Whirlwind Scorpius and the Vindicator Laser Destroyer, both of which are really quite cool tanks. They've also got the Forge World Space Marine Air Force as well. I must admit these ones didn't really strike me as particularly locked to Horus Heresy. Kind of surprised that they couldn't be considered contemporary. The Legion support weapons, so I guess that's your Rapier Laser Destroyers and the Quad Heavy Bolters. Fellblades, Falchions, and Mastodons, the Space Marine super heavies, including that really cool big enormous transport they have, and then the Javelin and the Dreadnought and Deathstorm drop pods. For Abmech, it looks like the Sekitari, Hoplites, and Palasts are going, the Titan Guard type units, and I guess that means that we're very unlikely to see any sort of mainstream 40k rules for things like the Battle Automata now. A lot of people were hoping for their Thanators and things like that to come to 40k. And listed in the Admech section as well is the Terax Pattern Termite Drill, the one that drops in and delivers a squad of units, and that one's usable by Chaos and Space Marines as well, so again that's a big loss relevant to a lot of armies. Finally, I'd say perhaps one of the single worst and most baffling changes is this list of chaos things that are going away, as to my mind these don't really seem like they're locked to the Horus Heresy in any way, shape or form. The Traitor Legion's technology hasn't changed enormously since the Horus Heresy, and they're typically the ones that tend to have a lot of old relic tech going around anyway. I think the Chaos Decimator with its nasty soul burners will be missed. The Greater Brass Scorpion and the Chiton Ravager are both great Cornate super heavies that a lot of people really quite liked, and I feel like maybe one of the most common things besides the Dreadnoughts for the Chaos Space Marines would be the Dreadclaw drop pod. That one's a fairly common competitive staple. It's nice to have their own unique drop pod variant, but I suppose not anymore. Otherwise, for models that have survived the Purge, it's not literally everything in Forge World, but it's really quite a big chunk of it. Besides things like the Forge World units for Xenos races, we've got the Imperial Knights staying, so things like the Cerastus and Acastus Platinum Knights, which it looks like are coming to plastic. That's pretty fortunate for Imperial Knight players, I think. It would have been a massive shame if they'd been removed, particularly with the shiny new plastic Lancer coming out, so I'm really glad that they're going to still be able to fill that in Warhammer 40k, plus the Moiraxes with their fun weapons for their armigers. The other army that I think it would have been really sad if they'd just gutted their Forge World range for them are Adeptus Custodes units, things like the Caladius, the variant Terminators, and their own fancy Dreadnought series. I feel like out of any Warhammer 40k army, the Custodians were perhaps the ones that were most reliant on their Forge World choices to actually become a well-rounded army. They do have a bit of a lack of plastic kits. Kind of with that reason, and the fact that they're so popular, I do kind of wonder if Games Workshop might convert the Custodians line into plastic at some stage, the same as they've done with the rest of the Heresy Dreadnoughts. I guess if the Knights are staying and they're becoming plastic, the Custodians staying might also potentially mean that we get plastic ones at some stage as well. I guess at least there's some chance that the mystery army that they're releasing for the Horus Heresy could be Custodians plus those extra units for the Sisters of Silence that were rumoured. Finally, before we get on to some thoughts, they did also preview one of the datasheets they'll be releasing for this. The Kratos battle tank has its datasheet here, and they have at least finally made it so Chaos Space Marines can field this as well, though of course only with Legends rules apparently. Still looks like a pretty mighty beast with the options for things like the battle cannon, the melter blast gun, and the great big Volkite gun. It looks like its special rule is to allow it to fire blast weapons into units in close combat with it, and not suffer the -1 to hit for being in combat. Definitely aimed to be a frontline tank. Overall, as you can tell from the tone of this video, even though it won't affect everyone, I feel like for the people who do affect, this will be very, very painful. Lots of players who do enjoy going to tournaments might have just had a whole load of their models basically just nullified for those purposes, and that's no small deal with the amount of time, effort and money that they spend on getting these Warhammer models together. They do give a few reasons for why they're doing this in their article. They want to keep their ranges separate, and a fair bit of the Horus Heresy stuff doesn't fit in aesthetically with dominating the battlefields of the 41st millennium. In general, the rules at the moment had tended to be written to try and keep them a bit more peripheral, but I feel like that was a balance that people were happy with. I feel like it was actually really quite a cool selling point that you could pick up a Leviathan Dreadnought or something, and then you could field that equally in both settings. Was a real strength and a selling point for the model, that you might be able to jump systems a little bit and play in both. Again, for many that still will be possible, but going to Legends is a big negative. They also did mention the difficulty of balancing all this stuff. Admittedly, the Space Marine range is very, very swollen, and this is one way that you can just cut down a massive part of it out of their balance updates. It was a bit of a challenge for them to try and make all of this somewhat relevant, but not actually the strongest thing in the game. Though I would argue in 9th edition Warhammer 40k they did alright. The vast majority of Forge World stuff tended to fall into the playable, but not actually all that good sort of bracket, and I feel like that was kind of appropriate for it. It means that they could turn up every so often in people's army lists who wanted to play them, maybe with an oddball tactic or two, but most players wouldn't really feel all that much pressure to go and seek them out. I feel like that balance was something that they were striking fairly well. I would have much preferred it if they kept to that sort of system of things. In general though, just to restate the main thing, I think that just a lot of people are going to be unhappy about having a lot of their currently sold models going to Legends. People kind of expect it when a Games Workshop stops selling a model, but a whole ton of this is still on sale and has been a core part of 40k for a very long time, things like the Relic Whirlwind Scorpius or the Leviathan Dreadnought, and it's particularly painful for people who go to tournaments and bought Leviathans and Contemptors from the Horus Heresy range that just came out, because they're really nice fancy plastic kits, and now they can't use their models in those events. They basically say they don't expect most things that come to the Heresy to also be present in 40k. They say that things that are added to Warhammer the Horus Heresy will only ever receive 40k rules if it would be appropriate, in other words considered to be somewhat common in the 41st millennium. I guess if they did wind up expanding the Custodes range, then that could apply to them maybe. I guess we'll wait and see on that front, but it sounds like it's going to be a rare exception as opposed to the rule for more mainline Space Marine stuff. Let me know what you think though. In general, I know this won't affect everyone, and people just playing casually and are happy to use the Legends datasheets will be absolutely fine. But there are a whole load of people out there who want to play things that are balanced with the updates and go to competitive events, and it is very horrible having a whole bunch of your models that you put time and effort into invalidated for that. In any case, if you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, including new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.